she couldn't walk, she couldn't escape, until a quiet stranger chose to carry her home. The sun was high in the sky, pouring its heat over the city streets and making the pavement shimmer in the afternoon light. Maria sat on the edge of the curb, her back against a graffiti-marked wall, trying to catch her breath. Her legs had betrayed her again. After years of illness and countless hospital visits, she had grown used to the weakness. But that didn't make it any easier to face. Today, the fatigue felt heavier than ever, as though the very air around her had turned to lead. People moved past her like she was invisible. Men in suits hurried by, briefcases swinging, their eyes fixed on some unseen destination. Mothers pushed strollers, their children tugging at their hands, excitedly pointing at store windows. Teenagers laughed and whispered to each other, earbuds in their ears, oblivious to the world beyond their small bubble. Maria tried to wave, to ask for help, but her voice felt caught in her throat. Every attempt to stand ended with her collapsing back onto the curb. She took a shaky breath, trying to ignore the sting of embarrassment that burned hotter than the sun above. She had lived most of her life learning to depend on herself. Asking for help didn't come naturally. But today, she had no choice. Every instinct that had kept her independent now mocked her, reminding her that she couldn't escape her weakness. She wasn't just tired. She was trapped. Her handbag sat beside her, worn and frayed at the edges. It had been with her for years, carrying everything she considered important. Inside were a few bills, an old photograph of her late husband, and a small notebook where she sometimes wrote down her thoughts. She reached for it, hoping the familiar weight might give her courage, but the simple act of lifting it was more than she could manage. Her fingers shook as they brushed against the strap, and she let it fall back to the ground with a soft thud. Maria's mind began to wander, as it often did when she felt helpless. She remembered the mornings when she could still walk to the park by herself, the joy of feeling the grass under her feet, and the sound of children's laughter carried by the wind. Those days seemed like a lifetime ago. Now the city felt bigger and colder, a place where no one seemed to notice the small struggles of people like her. Her heart ached as she watched a young couple pass by. The man held the woman's hand as they walked, smiling at each other, completely unaware of her presence. Maria felt a pang of loneliness. She had friends, yes, and family, but many lived far away or were too busy with their own lives. She understood that, of course. Life moved quickly, and the world had no patience for someone who slowed down. But understanding didn't make it any less painful. A car honked nearby, jolting her out of her thoughts. The noise made her flinch. The city had a way of overwhelming her senses. Too many sounds, too many movements, too many people rushing past. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block it all out. She thought about sitting there until someone noticed her, until someone finally stopped. But the minutes passed, and no one did. A few people glanced in her direction, curiosity flickering in their eyes for a brief moment, but they didn't pause. Perhaps they assumed she was resting or waiting for someone. Perhaps they didn't want to get involved. Maria didn't blame them. She knew the world taught people to look away from discomfort, but it hurt nonetheless. She felt as though she had become part of the street itself, just another object in the scenery, something people ignored as they carried on with their lives. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she swallowed them down. Crying in public felt impossible. She didn't want pity or awkward stares. She wanted someone to care, to see her not as an inconvenience but as a person who needed help. And yet, as she looked around at the passing faces, doubt crept in. Would anyone notice? Would anyone really care? The heat of the afternoon pressed down harder now, making her skin sticky and her clothes cling uncomfortably. She tried to shift her weight, but the effort left her breathless. Every step, Even the tiniest movement felt impossible. Her muscles ached in a way that made her wonder if they would ever obey her again. She closed her eyes, imagining a cool breeze, a gentle touch, something that would ease her pain even for a moment. Maria's thoughts returned to her home, the small apartment that felt like a sanctuary yet sometimes seemed too far away. She thought about the familiar smells, the scent of her kitchen, the faint perfume of flowers she kept on the windowsill. She longed to be there, to sink into her favorite chair and rest her legs. But getting there from here seemed like a mountain she could not climb. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Her hope began to waver. The crowd never slowed. No one stopped to offer a hand, a kind word, a moment of care. Maria felt a strange mix of shame and despair. She had always believed in the kindness of people, but today that belief felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. She wondered if she had imagined the world as a place where strangers helped each other. Perhaps it was only a dream, a memory from stories she had once read or heard. As she sat there, exhausted and defeated, Maria felt herself drifting into a quiet, internal dialogue. She asked herself why she hadn't called for help sooner, why she hadn't stayed closer to home. She berated herself for being alone in a city full of people. But then, a small, stubborn part of her reminded her that she had survived worse. She had faced challenges before, and she had always found a way through this. Could she find a way through this, too? She tried once more to lift herself from the curb. Her arms trembled as she pressed against the rough concrete, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed like she might succeed. But then her legs buckled, and she sank back down, her hands scraping against the gritty pavement. A sigh escaped her lips, carrying the weight of her disappointment and exhaustion. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest for just a moment, telling herself that perhaps help would come eventually. And then she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. A man, standing across the street, paused and looked in her direction. He didn't hurry past, didn't glance away. Instead, he stayed where he was, watching. There was something in the way he looked, calm, patient, unhurried, that made her heart skip. Could he be different from the others? Could he be someone who would see her struggle, not as a burden, but as a person in need? Maria held her breath, unsure if she dared hope. She had learned to guard her expectations carefully, to avoid disappointment. But something about this quiet stranger made her feel a flicker of trust, a tiny spark of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps, just perhaps, today might not end in despair after all. She sat there, still weak, still trapped, but now with a glimmer of possibility in her heart. She didn't know who he was, or why he was looking at her, but the simple fact that someone had noticed made her feel a little less invisible. And in a city where people rarely stopped, where the world often felt cold and uncaring, that small act of being seen was a powerful thing. Across the street, Daniel had been sitting quietly in the small cafe, sipping his lukewarm coffee, when he noticed her. At first, he thought she was just another elderly woman resting in the sun, but as he watched, he saw the tremor in her hands, the way she pressed herself against the wall for support, and the brief, desperate attempts to stand. Something about her struggle stirred a feeling inside him that he couldn't ignore. Daniel was not a man who usually involved himself in the lives of strangers. He believed in minding his own business, in walking past problems he couldn't solve. Yet today, something felt different. Perhaps it was the way she tried to hide her weakness, the dignity with which she fought against it, or perhaps it was the faint shadow of fear in her eyes that he could not ignore. Whatever it was, he found himself standing up, leaving his untouched coffee behind. He walked slowly, deliberately, navigating the bustling crowd as he approached her. Each step felt purposeful, yet careful, as though he didn't want to startle her. The sounds of the city surrounded him, the distant sirens, the chatter of pedestrians, the occasional honking of impatient drivers, but he felt a strange calm, as if the world around them had quieted. He focused only on her, and in that focus he felt a growing determination. Maria had noticed him too. At first she thought he might be just another passerby, someone who would glance her way and then keep moving. But he didn't. He stopped at a safe distance, his eyes meeting hers with a gentle steadiness. There was no judgment there, no rush, only attention. That attention, something so simple and human, made her chest tighten with a mix of hope and disbelief. Her heart raced. She had learned over the years that hope often ended in disappointment. Yet she couldn't deny the small flicker of relief she felt as he came closer. She wanted to speak, to call out for help, but the words felt stuck in her throat. All she could do was look at him, uncertain if she dared trust a stranger in this crowded, indifferent city. Daniel reached her side and crouched slightly to meet her gaze at eye level. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, calm, and unhurried. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" he asked. There was no rush, no condescension, only concern. That simple question, delivered with genuine care, struck Maria deeply. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "Yes, I can't walk," she managed to say, her voice shaking. The words were heavy, carrying all the fear, frustration, and exhaustion she had been holding inside. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he understood more than her words could explain. "That's okay," he said gently. "I can help you." Maria blinked, surprised. This was not the response she had expected. She had braced herself for hesitation, for excuses, maybe even for someone to turn away. But he didn't. He simply waited, quietly, patiently, as if his presence alone was enough to assure her that she was not alone. The street around them continued its relentless motion. People brushed past, some glancing briefly at the scene, others not noticing at all. But Daniel didn't let that distract him. He took a careful step closer, offering his arm. Maria hesitated, unsure if she could trust him, but the strength in his eyes, the quiet confidence, gave her courage. Slowly, trembling, she placed her hand on his arm. He guided her gently to a nearby bench. "Let's see if we can get you comfortable first," he suggested. They sat together, her frail frame leaning slightly against him for support. Daniel spoke calmly, asking questions in a soft, steady tone. "Do you live nearby? Can you walk a little if I support you?" Maria shook her head. I don't think so. My legs, they just won't." "I can't manage." She paused, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to get home." "I don't know what to do." Daniel listened, nodding, as if her words mattered deeply. "It's all right," he said. "We'll figure it out. You don't have to do this alone." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Maria's eyes. She had spent so many moments feeling invisible, abandoned, and weak, yet here was a stranger, a man she didn't know, offering her something she hadn't expected in a long time. Help, not pity, not judgment, just help. It was a strange, powerful feeling, one that stirred hope inside her that she hadn't felt in years. After a moment, Daniel suggested, "I can carry you if you want. It'll be easier for both of us, and we'll get you home safely." Maria hesitated. She had always been fiercely independent, proud of managing on her own, even when it was difficult. The idea of letting someone carry her felt humbling, almost frightening. But the exhaustion in her body, the weight of the city around her, made it impossible to refuse. Slowly, she nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Okay, thank you," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently, carefully lifting her as if she were a delicate package. Maria held on to him, her head resting against his shoulder. The warmth of his presence, combined with the steady pace of his steps, brought a surprising sense of comfort. For the first time that afternoon, she felt safe. The noise of the city, the heat, and the crowd all seemed to fade into the background as she focused on the calm rhythm of his movement. People moved past them, some noticing, some not. But Daniel didn't care. He carried her with quiet determination, navigating the uneven sidewalks and the obstacles that lined their path. Every step was careful, deliberate, and Maria felt herself relax into the security of being supported. As they walked, Daniel spoke softly, trying to ease her mind. "You're doing great," he said. "We'll get there. Don't worry about anything else right now." His words were simple, but they carried a reassurance that touched Maria deeply. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to remind her that it was okay to lean on another person. The journey wasn't long in distance, but for Maria, it felt significant. Each block they crossed was a reminder that help could arrive in unexpected ways, that not all strangers were indifferent. She found herself looking at Daniel with gratitude, wanting to express how much his kindness meant. Yet the words seemed too small for the feeling inside her. Daniel seemed to understand, needing no explanation. His focus remained on ensuring she was comfortable and safe. The city stretched around them, loud and chaotic, yet in that moment, it felt smaller, quieter, almost gentle. Maria realized that sometimes the world didn't have to be overwhelming, it just needed someone willing to care. By the time they reached the corner near her apartment building, Maria felt a mixture of relief and amazement. She had gone from feeling invisible and trapped to being supported by a stranger who had chosen to help. It was more than just physical assistance. It was a reminder of humanity, of the small acts of care that could change someone's day, or even their life. Daniel stopped and carefully set her down on a nearby bench to rest for a moment. "Almost there," he said kindly. "Take a deep breath. You're doing really well." Maria looked up at him, her eyes wet but shining with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I haven't felt this cared for I can't even remember." Daniel smiled softly. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm just glad I could help. That's all that matters." In that moment, Maria realized something important. It wasn't just about getting home. It was about being seen, being recognized, being treated with dignity and kindness. For so long she had felt invisible, but today, that had changed. And it had all started with one quiet stranger who chose to notice her struggle and respond with compassion. The sun had begun its slow descent in the sky, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. The afternoon heat was still present, but it was softened by a gentle breeze that carried the distant sounds of children laughing in the park and the occasional chirp of birds. Daniel had lifted Maria carefully into his arms, and now each step forward became a delicate balancing act. He moved slowly and deliberately, aware of every uneven crack in the pavement, every small obstacle that could make her fall. Maria held tightly to his shoulders, her heart pounding in a mixture of fear, relief, and awe. She had never imagined that someone would take the time to help her like this. The feeling of being carried by another human being was strange, almost foreign. But it was also comforting in a way that she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time that day, she felt the weight of her exhaustion lessened, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Daniel kept his eyes on the path ahead, scanning for dangers, avoiding bumps and potholes, careful not to jostle her. "We'll go slowly," he said softly. "I want you to feel safe." His voice was calm, steady, and reassuring, each word acting like a lifeline in the chaos of the city around them. Maria felt tears prick the corners of her eyes once again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and hope rather than fear and despair. As they moved, the world around them seemed to blur. Cars honked, bicycles weaved past, and pedestrians rushed in every direction. But Maria's focus remained on Daniel. He was quiet, but his presence spoke volumes. He didn't rush, he didn't complain, and he didn't look around to see who was watching. For her, that quiet determination was a source of strength. Maria thought about the many times in her life she had been alone. She had faced illness, loss, and moments of despair, often relying only on herself to get through. But now, in this small act of trust, she realized that sometimes help came from unexpected places, and that accepting it didn't make her weak. She felt a strange mix of vulnerability and liberation as Daniel carried her through the streets. The journey wasn't without its challenges. There were uneven sidewalks, loose gravel, and a few narrow corners where Daniel had to maneuver carefully. At one point, a cyclist suddenly swerved around a corner, nearly brushing against them. Daniel instinctively adjusted his hold on Maria, moving her slightly to avoid the collision. She felt a rush of adrenaline at the close call, but she also felt safe in his hands. His focus on her safety made her trust him even more. As they passed a small convenience store, Maria noticed a few people inside staring at them. She felt a flicker of embarrassment. Being carried through the streets drew attention, and she had always valued her independence. But Daniel didn't hesitate or falter. He moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to say, "It's okay. Don't worry about them." And somehow, that simple reassurance was enough to calm her nerves. The weight of the world, or at least the weight of her exhaustion, seemed to lift slightly with each step. Maria's mind wandered as she thought about the apartment she was being carried to. It was modest, filled with memories of her late husband and quiet afternoons spent reading or writing in her notebook. She imagined sinking into her favorite chair, the familiar cushions enveloping her, and she allowed herself to relax, trusting Daniel completely. Daniel, for his part, remained completely attentive. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was to provide comfort or guidance. "Almost there," he said as they approached a busy intersection. "Just a few more steps. You're doing wonderfully." His encouragement was soft but firm, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that went beyond gratitude. It was a sense of being truly seen and cared for. They paused briefly at the curb, waiting for the light to change. Maria felt the steady beat of Daniel's heart through his chest as he held her securely. She thought about how few times in her life she had allowed herself to rely on someone else so completely. It was a strange, humbling experience, but also liberating. She realized that trust, even with strangers, could be a powerful thing. When the light changed, Daniel carefully stepped onto the street, navigating through the flow of pedestrians. Some people glanced their way, curiosity flickering in their eyes, but Daniel didn't waver. His focus remained entirely on Maria. She felt protected, cocooned in a bubble of calm that made the chaotic city around them seem distant and irrelevant. As they continued, Maria's thoughts wandered to the small kindnesses she had experienced in her life. Friends who had called when she felt low, neighbors who had offered a smile or a wave, And now this stranger who had taken the time to help her in a moment of real need. Each act of care felt magnified in her mind, a reminder that humanity had a way of shining through, even in the most overwhelming circumstances. They reached a narrow street lined with parked cars, a shortcut that would take them closer to her apartment. Daniel slowed even further, carefully stepping around the vehicles and making sure Maria remained stable. She noticed the small beads of sweat on his forehead, evidence of the physical effort he was exerting, yet his expression remained calm and composed. It struck her as remarkable that someone could offer such help without complaint, without any thought of reward or recognition. At one point, Daniel stopped and crouched slightly, adjusting his hold to make her more comfortable. "Are you all right?" he asked. Maria nodded, her throat tight with emotion.
"Yes."
"Thank you," she whispered. Words felt inadequate, but they were all she could manage. The simple act of being acknowledged, being treated with care, filled her with a profound sense of relief. As they rounded the final corner leading to her building, Maria felt a surge of anticipation and gratitude. She could see the familiar facade of her apartment, the small balcony where she kept her flowers, and the doorway that had been unreachable just an hour ago. The journey that had seemed impossible moments before was now almost complete. Daniel sat her down gently on the pavement in front of her building, making sure she was steady before stepping back slightly. "Here we are," he said softly.
"You made it." Maria looked up at him, tears spilling freely now, a mix of exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude.
"I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. I've never had someone do this for me." Daniel smiled, a quiet, humble smile. "You don't need to thank me," he replied.
"I'm just glad I could help. That's enough."
His words were simple, yet they carried a profound sense of generosity that touched Maria deeply. She felt as if a weight had been lifted, not just from her body, but from her spirit as well. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the city moving around them, but the world feeling suspended. Maria felt a sense of connection, a bond formed not through years of friendship or family ties, but through a single act of kindness. It was a reminder that sometimes compassion could arrive in the most unexpected ways, transforming an ordinary day into something extraordinary. As she slowly made her way up the small steps to her apartment door, Daniel followed, ensuring she was safe with every step. She fumbled with her keys, her hands trembling from the emotional and physical strain, and he offered a steadying hand. Finally, the door opened, and Maria stepped inside, feeling the familiar warmth and comfort of home. She turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with gratitude. You've done more than I can ever explain," she said. "I don't even know your name." He shook his head gently. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Just take care of yourself. That's enough for me." And with that, he turned and left, disappearing into the city that had seemed so indifferent only moments before. Maria sank into her favorite chair, her body still weak, but her heart lighter than it had been all day. She reflected on the journey, on the kindness of a stranger, and on the unexpected ways in which life could restore faith in humanity. For hours afterward, she replayed the moment in her mind, savoring the quiet, profound sense of care that had transformed what could have been a day of despair into a memory of hope and human connection. The moment Maria stepped inside her apartment, the familiar warmth embraced her like an old friend. The small room smelled faintly of lavender from the flowers she kept on the windowsill, and the soft light filtering through the curtains cast gentle shadows on the walls. Everything was exactly as she had left it that morning. Books stacked neatly on the table, a teacup still resting on the counter, and the quiet hum of the city drifting in through the open window. For the first time that day, Maria felt a deep sense of relief, knowing she had made it home safely. Daniel followed her just a few steps behind, carefully keeping his distance as if to give her space.
"Do you need to sit?" he asked softly. His voice was steady, reassuring, and full of genuine concern.
Maria shook her head, though she felt tears brimming again. Words seemed insufficient to express what she felt. The act of being carried home, of having someone prioritize her safety and comfort without hesitation, was overwhelming. She sank slowly into her favorite armchair, the cushions supporting her frail body in a way that felt almost miraculous after the long struggle outside. Her legs still trembled from exhaustion, but the pain was dulled by the sense of security that had followed her through the journey. She glanced up at Daniel, who was standing quietly, his hands folded gently in front of him. She realized how unusual it was to meet someone so selfless, someone who could act without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. She had said it before, but now it felt heavier, more meaningful. It carried the weight of the hours she had spent feeling invisible, the fear that she might not make it home safely, and the gratitude that welled up in her heart for the man who had helped her. Daniel smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me," he said once more. "I just wanted to make sure you got home safely. That's all that matters." His humility struck her. In a world where so many people acted out of self-interest, here was someone whose kindness was pure, unassuming, and deliberate. Maria looked around her apartment, her eyes settling on the small details that made the space hers: the worn rug by the door, the photographs on the walls, the little trinkets she had collected over the years. They all represented her life, her memories, her independence. And yet in that moment she realized that independence didn't mean isolation. There was a difference between being self-reliant and being alone. And Daniel's act had reminded her that asking for help did not diminish her dignity. She reached for a cushion to make herself more comfortable, and then hesitated, unsure how to continue the conversation. Daniel had given her physical support, but now the emotional weight of the day lingered. She wanted to express how much his help meant, but the words felt fragile, inadequate to capture the gratitude swelling in her heart. Instead, she let herself breathe, allowing the quiet to fill the room with a sense of calm. Finally, she found her voice. "It's been a long time since someone cared so much without expecting anything back," she said softly. "You don't know what this means to me." Daniel nodded. "I understand," he replied. "Sometimes people forget how important these small acts of kindness can be. We get caught up in our own lives and forget that others are struggling. I just wanted to help." Maria's eyes welled with tears again. She thought about the hours she had spent feeling trapped and invisible, sitting on the curb in the hot sun, and she realized that those hours were now transformed into a memory of hope. The fear and exhaustion had not disappeared entirely, but they had been replaced with something more powerful: the knowledge that someone cared, truly cared, and had acted to make a difference. She looked at Daniel more closely for the first time, noticing the quiet determination in his eyes, the gentle lines of his face, and the calm assurance in his posture. There was a humility in the way he had carried her, a patience and steadiness that made her feel safe. She realized that this was more than a moment of physical help. It was a gesture that spoke to the very essence of human compassion. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of the city outside. Maria felt an unusual sense of peace. It was rare for her to allow herself to be vulnerable, but in that moment, vulnerability felt like strength. She had trusted a stranger completely, and in return, she had been treated with care, respect, and kindness. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "Do you want some water or tea?" he asked, Keeping his tone gentle and non-intrusive, Maria nodded, grateful for the simple offer. She realized how thoughtful small gestures could be, and how they could make someone feel valued and cared for. She moved slowly to the kitchen, still leaning slightly on the counter for support, while Daniel waited patiently. As she poured a cup of tea, Maria reflected on how her perspective had shifted over the past few hours. She had faced fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, yet those experiences had been met with compassion. She realized that kindness could arrive in unexpected forms, sometimes as a quiet stranger who simply chose to notice you. That realization filled her with a deep sense of gratitude and hope for the world around her. When she returned to the living room with the tea, Daniel was still standing quietly, giving her space but remaining close enough to ensure she was comfortable. She handed him a cup, insisting gently that he join her. "You should have something too," she said, her voice warm with appreciation. He smiled and accepted, sitting down in the chair across from her. They sipped their tea in silence for a few moments, sharing the quiet comfort of companionship. The simplicity of the act, a cup of tea, a shared moment, felt profound after the intensity of the afternoon. It was a reminder that human connection didn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes, the smallest acts could have the deepest impact. Maria felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. She thought about her life, the challenges she had faced, and the moments of despair she had endured. And now, in this quiet apartment, with a stranger who had become a temporary guardian of her safety, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. It was a humbling experience, yet it also brought a sense of joy and warmth that she hadn't expected. They talked quietly, sharing small details about their lives. Maria spoke about her love of reading, the joy she found in writing in her little notebook, and the simple pleasures that made her days meaningful. Daniel listened attentively, never interrupting, offering gentle encouragement and support. There was a rhythm to the conversation, a balance that made Maria feel both safe and heard. As the afternoon faded into evening, the light in the apartment softened, casting a warm glow across the room. Maria felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Daniel, but to the idea that the world could hold unexpected kindness. She realized that the fear and isolation she had felt earlier were no longer as overwhelming. There was a reminder now etched into her memory that hope could arrive even in the most unlikely moments. Finally, Daniel stood, ready to leave. "I should go," he said softly. "But remember, it's okay to ask for help when you need it. You don't have to face everything alone." Maria nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "I'll remember," she said. I can't thank you enough." He smiled gently, a final gesture of warmth and reassurance. "You don't need to. Just take care of yourself." And with that, he turned and left, stepping out into the city that had seemed so indifferent only hours before. Maria sank back into her chair, the events of the day washing over her. She reflected on the journey, from sitting helpless on the curb, to being carried through the streets, to finally arriving home safely. The experience had been transformative. It reminded her that even in a world that often felt hurried and uncaring, there were still people willing to act with compassion, patience, and selflessness. She thought about Daniel, the quiet stranger who had chosen to notice her, to offer help without hesitation or expectation. She realized that the act of kindness was more than just physical. It was emotional, deeply human, and profoundly impactful. It had restored a part of her faith in humanity that she had long thought lost. As evening fell and the city lights began to twinkle outside her window, Maria felt a sense of peace and gratitude that stayed with her long after Daniel had gone. She knew that the memory of this day, the kindness she had received, and the quiet bond formed in a few short hours would remain with her forever. It was a story she would carry in her heart, a reminder that even in moments of weakness, hope and compassion could arrive in the most unexpected ways. As evening deepened into night, Maria sat in her favorite chair, a soft blanket draped over her frail shoulders. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the city outside and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle night breeze. She held her cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into her hands, and reflected on the events of the day. The memory of being carried home by a stranger lingered vividly, replaying in her mind like a comforting scene from a dream. She thought about Daniel, the quiet man who had appeared at just the right moment, whose presence had transformed a day of fear and despair into one of safety and hope. She could still picture the calm steadiness in his eyes, the gentle strength in his hands, and the unspoken assurance that she was not alone. That memory brought tears to her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude and wonder rather than helplessness. For the first time in months, perhaps even years, Maria felt a renewed sense of trust in people. Life had taught her to be cautious, to guard her independence, and to accept that many strangers would pass by without notice. Yet Daniel's act reminded her that there were still those who would pause, who would act without expectation, who would choose to care when no one else might. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever, that kindness, even in its quietest form, could be life-changing. Maria moved slowly to the window, gazing out at the city streets below. The once overwhelming chaos now seemed distant and gentle, softened by the memory of the afternoon. She thought about all the people rushing past, oblivious to her struggle, and realized that it was the rare acts of care, the moments when someone noticed, when someone acted, that truly mattered. That thought filled her with a profound sense of calm. She picked up her small notebook from the table, the one she used to record thoughts, memories, and reflections. With a trembling hand, she began to write, not just about the day, but about the feelings it had stirred, the fear, the loneliness, and most importantly, the hope and trust that had been restored. Her words flowed slowly but deliberately, each sentence a tribute to the quiet courage and kindness of a stranger who had carried her through more than just streets. He had carried her through despair itself. Maria paused, taking a sip of her tea as she reflected on her emotions. She realized that this experience was more than just a memory. It was a turning point. She had faced fear, physical weakness, and vulnerability, and yet, in that vulnerability, she had found connection. She understood now that being open to help was not a weakness, but a form of strength, a recognition that no one had to face the world entirely alone. Her thoughts wandered to the people in her life, family, friends, neighbors, and she realized that while they loved her, the city's pace sometimes made her feel invisible, even among those who cared. Daniel had reminded her that attention, care, and presence were gifts in themselves. They didn't have to come with grand gestures. Sometimes all it took was a quiet willingness to notice and act. That insight left her feeling a subtle, lingering warmth that she knew would stay with her long after the memory faded. As the night deepened, Maria moved to the small balcony that overlooked the street below. She breathed in the cool night air, letting it wash over her, and thought about the journey that had begun just hours ago. It had started with helplessness on the curb, in the hot sun, feeling invisible to a rushing world. And now, here she was, safe, nourished, and reminded that hope could arrive in the most unexpected ways. She smiled softly, a quiet expression of gratitude for the stranger who had made all the difference. The city lights twinkled below, reflections dancing across the window pane. Maria felt a sense of connection, not just to Daniel, but to the world at large. There was a lesson in the day's events, that human beings, at their best, could offer kindness without expectation, and that those acts, no matter how small or quiet, had the power to transform lives. She realized that in a world often filled with indifference, a single choice to care could ripple far beyond the moment itself. Maria returned to her chair, notebook in hand, and wrote a final entry about Daniel. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, didn't know if she would have the chance to thank him properly. But she understood something crucial. Gratitude didn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it lived in memory, in reflection, and in the conscious choice to carry forward the lesson learned. She decided she would be more attentive, more willing to help, just as he had helped her. Hours passed, and Maria eventually set the notebook aside. She leaned back, closing her eyes, replaying every moment of the day. The fear, the exhaustion, the quiet courage of the stranger, the journey home, and the final sense of safety. Each memory was vivid, each emotion still strong, yet there was a peacefulness now that had not been there before. The city outside continued its rhythm, but inside, Maria felt a calm certainty. That kindness existed, that trust could be restored, and that connection could arrive when least expected. She thought about what she would tell her friends and family, not just the story of being carried home, but the lesson it had brought, that even small acts of care mattered immensely, that people could choose to act with compassion in moments that seemed ordinary, but were, in fact, extraordinary. She realized that the day's experience was not just about her struggle. It was about the beauty of human connection, about the difference one person could make in another's life. As midnight approached, Maria finally stood, her legs still weak, but her spirit lifted. She moved slowly to her bed, reflecting on the day and the quiet stranger whose name she didn't know, whose face she would always remember, and whose actions had reminded her of the goodness in people. Lying down, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and peace. Her body had been weak, but her heart felt stronger than it had in a long time. Before closing her eyes completely, Maria whispered a quiet thank you into the stillness of her apartment, not just for Daniel, but for the lesson he had imparted without words. She vowed to herself that she would remember it, that she would carry forward the understanding that helping others, noticing those in need, and acting with care were the true measures of humanity. She fell asleep with that thought, a soft smile on her face, knowing that the day, once filled with fear and uncertainty, had become one of the most meaningful moments of her life. The next morning, Maria awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. She felt lighter, not just physically, but emotionally. She thought about the world outside her windows, the people rushing past in their busy lives, and she realized that she too could make a difference. She didn't need to perform grand gestures. Small acts of attention and kindness, the willingness to notice and help, could ripple outward and change lives, just as Daniel had changed hers. In the weeks that followed, Maria carried that lesson with her. She reached out more often to neighbors, offered assistance where she could, and allowed herself to accept help when it was offered. Each time she did, she remembered Daniel and the afternoon that had transformed her perspective. She knew she might never see him again, but his quiet courage had left an indelible mark on her life. Maria's story became one she shared gently with others, not to seek praise or recognition, but to remind people that the simplest acts of compassion were often the most powerful. A stranger's kindness had shown her the value of connection, the importance of being seen, and the enduring power of human empathy, and in that she found a quiet joy and hope that carried her forward day by day with a renewed belief in the goodness of people. That day she had learned something she would never forget. Even in moments of fear and weakness, Even when the world seemed indifferent, there was hope. And sometimes, all it took to restore it was a quiet stranger who chose to care.